Welcome to Revenge Mode, a story from Charleston, Carolina. One day I was in a traffic accident and needed emergency surgery. My parents never came despite the doctor calling to notify them. Instead, my mother tagged me in a photo with the caption, "Finally, a trip to Hawaii." I wasn't sad. I just stayed silent. A few days after the surgery, when my health had barely stabilized, I saw 12 missed calls and 6 messages from my father. "We need you. Call us back." Without hesitation, I made them. I'm Crystal, 24 years old. 2 weeks ago, at a flooded intersection in the middle of a massive storm in Charleston, I was pinned inside a mangled car after a horrific collision. In that moment, on the edge of life and death, the most painful part wasn't my shattered bones. It was this cruel truth: my parents didn't show up even though the doctor called to tell them I was in a car accident and needed emergency surgery. Instead, my mom tagged me in a photo. Finally, the Hawaii trip. I wasn't sad. I was just silent. 3 days after surgery, when I could finally open my eyes, my phone vibrated. 12 missed calls, 6 text messages from Dad. The last text read, "This is very serious. We need you to sign some papers." For the first time, I understood they weren't worried about me. They were worried about something else entirely. And I made them pay the highest price for that heartlessness. Before I tell you what I did, if you've ever felt invisible, or worse, felt like you were just a financial tool in your own family, please take a second to like and subscribe to this channel. Because this story is for you, and you really need to know how it ends. Let me take you back 12 hours before the world went black. It was 11 p.m. on a Thursday, and the humidity in Charleston was so thick you could practically chew it. Inside my bedroom, the air conditioner rattled violently, fighting a losing battle against the heat, but the noise was nothing compared to the pounding in my head. I was staring at my dual monitors, eyes burning as if someone had rubbed sandpaper over my corneas. On the screen was a 3D rendering of a mid-century modern kitchen for a client in downtown Seattle. I had been awake for 36 hours straight. I wasn't working this hard for passion. I was working for survival. My banking app was open on the second screen. Balance $2,150. Pending transfer $2,000. That money wasn't for a vacation. It wasn't for a new car. It was for the homeowner's insurance premium on the sprawling, decaying Victorian house we lived in on Trad Street. Technically, the house was in my grandmother's name, but my parents lived there like royalty, while I lived in the smallest room at the back, paying every single bill that kept the lights on and the roof from leaking. If I didn't wire this money by tomorrow morning, the policy would lapse. And if the policy lapsed during hurricane season, we would lose everything. I took a sip of lukewarm energy drink, my hand trembling slightly from the caffeine overdose. Just one more render. Just hit send, get the invoice paid, and I could sleep for 3 hours before driving everyone to the airport. Bang. My bedroom door flew open, slamming against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. I jumped, knocking the energy drink over. Dark liquid pooled onto my desk, missing my keyboard by an inch. "You ruined everything." My younger sister Tiffany stood in the doorway. At 21, she was the golden child, perfect hair, perfect skin, and a perfect lack of responsibility. Currently, her face was blotchy from crying, and she was holding a garment bag that looked suspiciously empty. "Tiffany, I'm working," I said, my voice raspy. "I have a deadline in 20 minutes. "I don't care about your stupid drawings," she shrieked, throwing the garment bag at me. "My custom silk dress, the one for the luau party, it's still at the tailor's in Mount Pleasant." I rubbed my temples. "Okay, so go pick it up tomorrow morning before the flight." "I can't," she wailed, stomping her foot like a toddler. "I have a lash appointment at 8 a.m. and then we have to be at the airport by 10. The tailor opens at 7 o'clock, but it's 40 minutes away. I can't do both." "That sounds like a time management problem, Tiff." "Not my problem." I turned back to my screen, grabbing a paper towel to blot the spill. "I can't help you. I haven't slept in 2 days. Mom! Tiffany screamed, turning toward the hallway. Crystal is being a bitch. A moment later, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. My mother, Marilyn, appeared. She was already in her silk pajamas, a face mask slathered over her skin, preparing for her relaxing trip. She looked at Tiffany's tear-streaked face, then glared at me with that familiar coldness that always made my stomach churn. "What did you do to your sister?" Marilyn asked. Her tone wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "I didn't do anything," I said, not looking up. "She forgot her dress. I'm working. I have to pay the insurance bill, remember? The one that keeps a roof over your head." Marilyn walked over and slammed my laptop shut. "Hey." I stood up, panic rising. "I haven't saved the file." "I don't care about your little computer games," Marilyn hissed, leaning in close. "Your sister needs that dress. It's for her Instagram collaboration. Do you know how hard she works on her brand? If she doesn't have that dress, she can't take the photos. If she can't take the photos, the whole trip is ruined." "Mom, look outside." I pointed to the window where rain was lashing against the glass. "There's a storm warning. It's flooding downtown. You want me to drive to Mount Pleasant right now? It's nearly midnight." "You're the big sister, Crystal. Act like it." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm tired. I'm paying for this house. I paid for your plane tickets. I am not driving 40 miles in a storm for a dress." Marilyn straightened up, crossing her arms. A cruel smile played on her lips. "Is that so? Well, since you're so concerned about who pays for what, let me remind you whose name is on the deed of this house. It's Grandma Rose's house, but we are the guardians. If you're too selfish to help the family, maybe you're too selfish to live here." My blood ran cold. "You're threatening to kick me out. I pay the mortgage interest, I pay the utilities. And you can pay them from the street if you don't get in that car right now," Marilyn said calmly. "Don't test me, Crystal. Get the dress or find a new place to live by the time we get back from Hawaii." I looked past her to the living room. My father, Frank, was sitting on the leather recliner I had bought him last Christmas, watching a baseball game. "Dad," I called out, desperate. "Dad, are you hearing this? It's dangerous out there." Frank didn't even turn his head. He just took a sip of his beer and muttered, "Listen to your mother, Crystal. Don't cause drama. Just get the damn dress." Silence filled the room, broken only by the thunder rolling outside. I looked at Tiffany, who was smirking now, her tears miraculously gone. I looked at Marilyn, whose eyes held zero empathy, only annoyance that I was wasting her time. I was trapped. If I didn't go, they would throw my things on the lawn. I had nowhere else to go, no savings left, because I had just spent it all on their insurance. "Fine," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. "I'll go." "Good girl." Marilyn patted my cheek, her nails scratching my skin slightly. "Don't scratch the car. We need it for the airport tomorrow." 10 minutes later, I was in my sedan, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking the earth. The windshield wipers were thrashing back and forth at maximum speed, but I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. The streets of Charleston were slick with oil and rising water. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced over. A text from Tiffany. "Make sure they wrap it in plastic. I don't want the humidity to ruin the silk." Rage, hot and blinding, surged through my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn the car around. But mostly I just wanted to close my eyes. My eyelids felt like lead weights. The rhythmic swish-swish of the wipers was hypnotic. "Just blink," my brain whispered. "Just for a second." I shook my head, trying to force myself awake. "Focus, Crystal. Focus." I entered the intersection at Calhoun Street. The light was green. I was sure it was green, but my reflexes, dulled by 36 hours of sleepless labor and emotional exhaustion, were half a second too slow. I didn't see the delivery truck hydroplaning from the cross street until its headlights flooded my cabin with blinding white light. I didn't have time to break. I didn't even have time to scream. There was only the deafening sound of crunching metal, the shattering of glass, and then nothing but the cold, dark silence. 3 days. That was how long I had been staring at the beige ceiling tiles of the Charleston Memorial Hospital, counting the water stains to keep myself from screaming. The silence in my room was suffocating. Outside the window, life went on, but inside time seemed to have frozen. My left leg was encased in a heavy plaster cast suspended by a pulley system. My ribs were taped, making every breath a shallow, stinging effort. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollowness in my chest. Here, drink this. Megan, my best friend from design school, held a straw to my lips. She had been sleeping in the uncomfortable plastic chair in the corner for 2 nights straight, refusing to leave even though she had her own job to get to. She looked exhausted, her eyeliner smudged, but her eyes were fierce with protective anger. "Thanks, Meg," I whispered, the water soothing my parched throat. "Don't thank me," she snapped gently, putting the cup down. "Thank the nurses who actually care, unlike some people." She didn't need to say their names. We both knew who she meant. Just then, the heavy door to my room swung open. The rhythmic click-clack of expensive high heels on the linoleum floor echoed through the small space, commanding immediate attention. I turned my head, slowly wincing at the stiffness in my neck. Standing in the doorway was a woman I hadn't seen in nearly a decade yet. I recognized her instantly. She was wearing a tailored navy blazer that probably cost more than my entire year's rent, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She looked like a sharper, more formidable version of my father. It was Deborah, my father's sister. Instinctive panic seized my throat. My heart rate monitor began to beep faster. I tried to push myself up, ignoring the searing pain in my ribs. "Crystal, calm down," Megan said, putting a hand on my shoulder, but I couldn't. Suddenly, the hospital room faded. I wasn't 24 anymore. I was 16. Flashback. It was a humid afternoon in July. I was sitting on the front porch of the Trad Street house, attempting to fix a broken shutter that Dad promised to repair months ago. Through the overgrown ivy on the wrought iron gate, I saw a woman standing on the sidewalk. She was holding a beautifully wrapped gift box, looking at the house with an expression of profound sadness. I stood up, wiping sawdust from my hands, and started walking toward the gate. She saw me, and her face lit up with a tentative, hopeful smile. She raised a hand as if to wave. Before I could take another step, a hand clamped onto my arm like a vice. It was my mother, Marilyn. "Get inside," Mom hissed, her voice low and venomous. She dragged me back toward the front door, her nails digging into my skin. "Mom, who is that?" "She has a present," I asked, looking back. The woman at the gate hadn't moved, but her hand had dropped to her side. "Don't look at her, Crystal," Mom spat, slamming the heavy oak door behind us and locking it. "That is your Aunt Deborah. She is a vulture, a thief. A thief. She tried to steal this house from your grandmother. She hates us. She hates you. If she ever tries to talk to you, run. She only wants to trick you out of your future. Do you understand me?" I nodded, terrified by the intensity in Mom's eyes. From that day on, Deborah became the boogeyman in our family stories, the greedy villain who abandoned us. End of flashback. Back in the hospital room, the villain was walking toward my bed. But as she got closer, I didn't see greed in her eyes. I saw tears. "Crystal," she said, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't the voice of a monster. It was soft-laced with a grief that felt terrifyingly genuine. "My God, look at what they've done to you. You," I croaked, my voice defensive. "You shouldn't be here." Mom said. "I know what Marilyn said," Deborah interrupted gently. She pulled a chair close to the bed, disregarding the dust on the seat. She reached out to take my hand, but hesitated, seeing the bruises on my wrist. Instead, she placed her hand on the bedsheet near mine. "She told you I was a thief. She told you I didn't care. She probably told you I abandoned the family." I stared at her, waiting for the trap. Didn't you? Deborah let out a bitter, short laugh. Crystal, I have sent you a birthday card and a check every single year since you were born. I have called that house every Christmas. Your father blocked my number. Your mother returned every letter marked refused. I hired a private investigator just to get updates on you because they wouldn't let me within 100 feet of that house. My head was spinning. Why? Why would they do that? Control, Megan answered from the corner. She stood up holding her iPad. And because they needed you to feel alone. If you knew you had an aunt who was a successful real estate mogul in Atlanta, you might have realized you didn't have to be their servant. Megan called me, Deborah explained, looking at my friend with gratitude. She found my number in your old emergency contacts, the one you secretly added when you were 18. I looked at Megan. She nodded grimly. Crystal, you need to see this. You need to understand why Deborah is here, and why your parents aren't. Megan unlocked the iPad and tapped the screen. It was an Instagram live replay from an hour ago. The video was bright and loud. The background showed a pristine white canopy bed and a balcony overlooking the turquoise waters of Waikiki. There was Tiffany. She was wearing a flower crown and holding a massive lobster tail dripping with butter. My mother Marilyn was in the background, laughing and clinking a champagne glass with my father. They looked radiant. They looked rich. They looked unburdened. Hey guys. Tiffany chirped to the camera, reading comments. Oh, thanks for the stars. We are having a blast. The weather is literally perfect. A comment popped up on the screen. User 123. Is your sister okay? I heard she crashed the car. Tiffany rolled her eyes, a gesture so familiar it made my stomach turn. Ugh, don't believe everything you hear. Crystal is totally fine. She's just dramatic. It was barely a scratch. She's probably at home watching Netflix right now. Anyway, look at this sauce. Megan paused the video. The frozen image of Tiffany's dismissive smirk burned into my retinas. A scratch, I whispered. I looked down at my shattered leg. I felt the throbbing in my skull where they had stitched me up. They're eating lobster with my money, and lying about me dying. They aren't just lying, Crystal, Deborah said, her voice hardening into steel. They are erasing the reality of your pain to protect their social media image. They left you here alone because acknowledging your injury would mean acknowledging their negligence. Deborah stood up, her presence filling the room. The fear I had felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, clarifying rage. The woman at the gate hadn't been trying to steal from me. She had been trying to save me. I have spent 20 years respecting their wishes to stay away because I didn't want to cause a war, Deborah said, looking me dead in the eye. But looking at you in this bed, the peace treaty is over. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a thick leather-bound folder. There is something else they didn't want you to know, Deborah said. Something about your grandmother, Rose. And it's time you knew the truth. The leather folder hit the hospital tray table with a heavy, ominous thud. Deborah opened it, revealing a stack of yellowed documents that smelled of old cedar and vanilla, the exact scent of the grandmother I barely remembered. Your grandmother Rose didn't just die. Deborah began smoothing out the top page. She planned. She knew that my brother, your father, was weak, and she knew Marilyn was a shark. Rose couldn't cut them out of her will entirely without causing a legal war, so she did something smarter. She created a living trust. I squinted at the bold text at the top of the page. The Rose Bennett Revocable Trust. What does this mean? I asked, my voice hoarse. It means the house on Trad Street isn't theirs, Deborah said, pointing to a paragraph. They have life estate rights, meaning they can live there, but the ownership title is held by the trust, and the primary beneficiary of the trust is you. My heart skipped a beat. Me. Yes. But there is more. Deborah flipped to the financial section. Rose liquidated her stock portfolio before she passed. She put the cash into a high-yield account protected by the trust. As of this morning, the balance is exactly $500,000. Me, 500,000. The number echoed in my head, absurd and impossible. I had been eating instant noodles for 3 years. I had nearly killed myself driving in a storm for a $2,000 insurance bill. And all this time, there was $500,000 with my name on it. Why? Why didn't I know? I stammered. Because you aren't 25 yet, Deborah explained. Rose set the age of distribution at 25. She wanted to make sure you were mature enough to handle it away from your parents' influence. I am the trustee. My job is to protect that money until your next birthday. So they can't touch it? Under normal circumstances, no, Deborah said. Her expression darkened and she leaned in closer. But there is a loophole. Clause 14, Section B, incapacitation. She turned the page and tapped a specific paragraph with her manicured fingernail. Rose wanted to ensure you were cared for if tragedy struck. The clause states that if the beneficiary, that's you, suffers a medical event rendering them incapacitated or unable to make decisions, the trustee must release funds for their care and maintenance. Okay, I said slowly, the fog in my brain clearing. But you're the trustee. You would decide. I control the checkbook, yes, Deborah said sharply. But I don't control the patient. If you are in a coma, or if you are deemed mentally incompetent due to head trauma, who makes your medical decisions? Who decides where you live? Who decides how much care costs? Megan gasped from the corner. The next of kin. Exactly. Deborah nodded grimly. Your parents. If you are incapacitated, Frank and Marilyn become your legal guardians. They could move you into a cheap facility or back into that house and bill the trust $10,000 a month for private nursing care that they provide themselves. They could drain the fund dry in the name of taking care of Crystal, and legally, my hands would be tied. The room spun. The 12 missed calls. The frantic texts from Dad. This is serious. We need you to sign papers. That's why he texted me. I whispered, bile rising in my throat. When the doctor called them, he said I needed emergency surgery. He probably mentioned head trauma. They thought you were brain damaged, Deborah confirmed brutally. Or at least they hoped you were out of it long enough for them to establish guardianship. They didn't fly to Hawaii to ignore you, Crystal. They flew to Hawaii to celebrate, thinking the jackpot had finally paid out. But when I showed up and blocked their access to the bank accounts, they panicked. Now they are trying to get to you before I do. They want me to sign a power of attorney to them, I realized. If I'm awake, they need me to sign my rights away voluntarily. That's the paperwork Dad mentioned. Precisely. If you sign their papers, they control you. If they control you, they control the money. Deborah pulled a fresh, crisp document from her briefcase. But we are going to beat them at their own game. She placed a pen in my trembling hand. This is a durable power of attorney for healthcare and finances, Deborah said softly. If you sign this, you appoint me as your agent. It overrides your parents' rights as next of kin. It means I make the decisions. I control the money. I control who enters this hospital room. And most importantly, it means they get nothing. I looked at the paper. The black ink blurred slightly as tears welled in my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of finality. For 24 years, I had chased their validation. I had worked, bled, and sacrificed just to hear them say, "Good job." I had driven into a storm because I was terrified of losing their love. But there was no love. There was only calculation. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was a lottery ticket waiting to be cashed. Crystal, Megan said softly, you don't have to be their victim anymore. I gripped the pen. My hand was shaking from the pain in my fractured arm, but my mind had never been clearer. I thought about Tiffany eating lobster. I thought about Marilyn locking the gate on Aunt Deborah. I thought about Frank sitting in his recliner ignoring my plea for safety. I pressed the pen to the paper. I, Crystal Bennett, being of sound mind. I signed my name. The signature was jagged and weak, but it was the strongest thing I had ever done. Take it, I said, pushing the document toward Deborah. Take everything away from them. Deborah took the paper, reviewed the signature, and nodded. A look of fierce determination crossed her face. She wasn't just an aunt anymore. She was a general going to war. Rest now, Crystal, Deborah said, placing the document safely back into her folder. You've done your part. Now let me do mine. When they walk through that door, they are going to find out that the slave they left behind has just become their landlord. 2 hours after I signed my freedom over to Aunt Deborah, the inevitable happened. They're here, Megan whispered, looking out the slat of the hospital blinds. She turned to Deborah, her eyes wide with nervous energy. I see Frank's rental car pulling up to the main entrance. They look pissed. Deborah checked her watch, her expression unreadable. Right on schedule. The bank notification about the frozen assets must have hit them while they were trying to check out of the resort. What do I do? I asked, feeling a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Even armed with the truth, the conditioning of 24 years was hard to break. My body still wanted to shrink, to apologize, to fix whatever problem was making my father angry. You do nothing, Deborah said calmly, smoothing the sheets over my cast. You let them speak. You let them dig their own grave. I will be right in here. She pointed to the ensuite bathroom door. You're hiding. I am witnessing, Deborah corrected. If they see me too soon, they will put their masks back on. We need them unmasked. We need them to show you exactly who they are one last time, so you never doubt your decision again. With that, Deborah slipped into the bathroom and pulled the door until it was just a crack ajar. Megan sat back in the corner chair, pretending to read a magazine, though her knuckles were white as she gripped the pages. 5 minutes later, the hallway door swung open. There was no dramatic entrance. There were no balloons, no frantic rushing to the bedside, no tearful cries of "my baby" that you would expect from parents seeing their child for the first time after a near-fatal accident. Instead, the air in the room instantly dropped 10 degrees. Frank walked in first. He was wearing a floral Hawaiian shirt that looked grotesque against the sterile white walls of the hospital. His face was tanned, but his expression was thunderous. Marilyn followed, dragging a Louis Vuitton suitcase as if the hospital room were a hotel lobby. Tiffany trailed behind, typing furiously on her phone, barely glancing up. Do you have any idea? Frank started, his voice a low growl. How humiliating it is to have a platinum card declined in the middle of the Four Seasons lobby. He didn't look at my leg. He didn't look at the bandages on my head. He looked straight at me, his eyes burning with the inconvenience of it all. We had to call the bank for an hour, Marilyn chimed in, dropping into the visitor chair with a heavy sigh. She adjusted her sunglasses, pushing them onto her head. They said there was a suspicious freeze on the joint account. The account you deposit your checks into, Crystal. Did you forget to make the transfer before you crashed the car? I stared at them. The silence in my head was deafening. I was lying in a hospital bed, broken and stitched together, and their first sentence wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "Where is the money?" I've been in surgery? Mom, I managed to say, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I haven't touched my phone. Well, someone messed up, Frank snapped. He paced the small room, avoiding looking at the IV tubes running into my arm. We had to use the emergency cash just to buy plane tickets home, a total waste of a vacation. Do you know how much we lost in non-refundable bookings? Dad, Tiffany whined from the doorway, finally looking up. The Wi-Fi here sucks. Can I go to the cafeteria? I need to upload the sad journey home vlog before the algorithm peak time. Go. Frank waved her off dismissively. Then he turned his attention back to me. He took a deep breath, seeming to remember that he needed something from me. He smoothed his features into a mask of strained patience, the same look he gave clients before upselling them on a bad deal. Look, Crystal, Frank said, stepping closer to the bed. We can discuss the banking error later. Right now we have a bigger problem. The hospital administration stopped me at the desk. They did. Yes. The bills are piling up. Surgery, anesthesia, this private room. It's astronomical. He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a blue legal folder. The insurance company is pushing back because the accident happened during a storm warning. They're claiming negligence. My heart hammered against my ribs. Negligence. The negligence of a daughter forced to drive by her mother's vanity. So, Frank continued, uncapping a heavy fountain pen. I've been on the phone with our family lawyer all morning. We found a workaround. We need to restructure how your care is managed so we can access the emergency medical funds in your accounts. He placed the folder on my tray table, opening it to the last page. It was already flagged with a yellow "Sign here" sticky note. Sign this, Frank said, offering me the pen. It's just a standard insurance form. It authorizes me to handle the billing dispute so you don't have to worry about it. We need to get this filed by 5 p.m. or they might stop your treatment. Stop my treatment? A threat wrapped in concern. I looked at the paper. The text was dense, single-spaced legalese. Read it, a voice in my head whispered. It sounded like Deborah. I leaned forward, ignoring the sharp pull in my ribs. Dad, I said slowly. This doesn't say insurance. It's technical jargon, Crystal. Don't waste time. My eyes scanned the header of the document. It wasn't an insurance claim. It was a petition titled Voluntary Transfer of Guardianship and Conservatorship. I read the first paragraph. I, Crystal Bennett, hereby declare myself physically and mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs due to severe trauma. I voluntarily surrender all legal, medical, and financial decision-making powers to my next of kin, Frank Bennett and Marilyn Bennett, effective immediately. Financial decision-making powers. They knew. They knew about the trust fund. They knew about the loophole. And they were standing here 5 days late trying to trick me into signing my life away so they could raid my grandmother's legacy to pay for the vacation I ruined. I looked up at Frank. For the first time in my life, I didn't see a father. I didn't see a man who had taught me to ride a bike or walked me to the school bus. I saw a businessman looking at a failed investment, trying to salvage whatever assets he could before cutting his losses. You're not here to pay my bills, I whispered, the realization settling over me like a shroud. You're here to take control of the trust. Frank's face hardened. The mask slipped. That money belongs to this family, Crystal. Your grandmother was senile when she wrote that will. You are 24 years old. You make coffee and draw kitchens. You aren't equipped to handle $500,000. So you lied, I said, my voice rising. You told me it was for insurance. I am trying to protect you. Frank slammed his hand on the tray table, making me jump. If you don't sign that, who is going to take care of you? You can't walk. You can't work. You are useless right now. Do you think you can survive on your own? Marilyn stood up, crossing her arms. Just sign the paper, Crystal. Don't be dramatic. We are your parents. We know what's best. I looked at the pen in Frank's hand. It was poised, waiting. All my life I had signed whatever they asked. Student loans that they used for renovations. Car leases for vehicles I wasn't allowed to drive. But today, the ink in that pen felt like poison. I reached out and took the folder. Frank smirked, thinking he had won, thinking I was still the scared little girl who would drive into a hurricane just to make him happy. I held the document up to the light. I looked at the word incompetent. You're right, Dad, I said softly. I have been incompetent. I was incompetent enough to believe you loved me. Frank frowned. What are you talking about? Sign it. No. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. What did you say? Frank whispered, dangerous. I said no. and with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I ripped the document down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was quieter than the storm that had wrecked my car, but inside that sterile hospital room, it sounded like a gunshot. The two halves of the guardianship petition fluttered from my hands, drifting slowly through the air before landing on Frank's polished leather shoes. For a moment, nobody breathed. The air conditioner hummed a stark contrast to the suffocating tension that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Frank stared at the torn paper, his face turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. The vein in his forehead throbbed violently. "You ungrateful little—" Frank snarled, stepping forward, his hand raising instinctively as if to strike a disobedient child. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You just threw away your only lifeline." "She didn't throw away her lifeline, Frank," a calm, icy voice cut through the air. "She threw away yours." The bathroom door, which had been cracked open, swung wide. Deborah stepped out. She didn't look like the ghost from my childhood memories anymore. She looked like a judge walking into her courtroom to deliver a death sentence. Her posture was rigid, her eyes locked on her brother with searing intensity. Frank froze. His hand dropped. He blinked as if hallucinating. "Deborah," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What? How did you get in here?" Marilyn gasped, clutching her Louis Vuitton bag to her chest as if it could shield her from the past. You have no right to be here. This is a private family matter." "It became my matter the moment you tried to defraud my niece," Deborah said, walking past them to stand beside my bed. She placed a protective hand on my shoulder, a physical barrier between me and their greed. "Get out," Frank hissed, regaining his composure. "I am her father. I am her next of kin. I have the legal right to decide who visits her, and I am banning you from this hospital." "Security." "Save your breath," Deborah said. She reached into her blazer and pulled out the document I had signed only hours ago. She held it up, the fresh ink of my signature facing them like a weapon. "You are looking at a durable power of attorney effective immediately. Crystal has appointed me as her sole legal, medical, and financial agent." Frank squinted at the paper, his jaw dropping. "That means," Deborah continued, her voice sharpening, "that your status as next of kin is now irrelevant. You have no authority here. You cannot access her medical records. You cannot speak to her doctors. And you certainly cannot touch the trust." "You manipulated her!" Marilyn shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Crystal isn't in her right mind. She's on medication. That signature is void." "My client is perfectly lucid." Megan spoke up from the corner, holding up her phone. The red recording light was blinking. "I have the entire signing process on video, including the part where the doctor verified her mental state before witnessing it." Marilyn's face went pale. She looked at Frank, desperate for him to fix this, but Frank was staring at me. The realization was dawning on him: the failed investment had just liquidated him. "Crystal," Frank said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, manipulative whisper. "Think about what you're doing. She's poisoning you against us. We are your family. We are the ones who put a roof over your head." "About that roof?" Deborah interrupted, opening her leather folder again. "We need to talk about the house on Trad Street." Just then the door opened. Tiffany walked in, holding a cafeteria latte, looking annoyed at the shouting. "God, can you guys keep it down? People are staring in the hallway." "Shut up, Tiffany," Frank snapped, not looking at her. "The house," Deborah said loudly, ensuring every word landed. "As you know, the Trad Street property is held by the Rose Bennett Trust. The deed allows for family occupancy provided the occupants act in the best interest of the primary beneficiary." Deborah pulled out a single sheet of paper with a red stamp at the top. "By abandoning the beneficiary in a critical care unit to go on a vacation, by attempting to coerce the beneficiary into signing away her rights, and by misappropriating funds intended for house maintenance to buy luxury cars." Deborah paused, looking straight at Tiffany. You have violated the terms of the occupancy agreement. Tiffany lowered her latte, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. What is she talking about, Dad? Deborah handed the paper to Frank. This is a 30-day notice to vacate. You are being evicted. The silence that followed was absolute. Evicted. Tiffany whispered the word, feeling foreign on her tongue. But that's my house. My studio is there. My clothes are there. It's Crystal's house, Deborah corrected. It always was. You were just guests who overstayed your welcome. You can't do this, Frank shouted, tearing the eviction notice in frustration, mirroring what I had done moments before. I have rights. I have squatters' rights. Tear it up all you want, Deborah said coolly. The sheriff's department has the original. If you are not out by the 1st of the month, your belongings will be placed on the curb, including the custom silk dress you were so worried about. Tiffany looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. For the first time, she wasn't looking at her sister, the doormat. She was looking at the person who held the keys to her entire existence. She realized the ATM was closed. The free ride was over. She was 21, unskilled, unemployed, and about to be homeless. Crystal, please, Tiffany stammered, rushing to the side of the bed, tears welling up in her eyes, real tears this time born of pure selfishness. You can't let her do this. Where am I going to go? I can't live in an apartment. My followers, they think I'm rich. I looked at my sister. I looked at the panic in her eyes. It wasn't love. It was the fear of a parasite losing its host. You figured out how to fly to Hawaii without me. I said, my voice raspy but steady. I'm sure you can figure out how to pay rent. You bitch! Frank lunged forward, his control snapping. After everything I did for you, I raised you, I fed you. Before he could reach the bed, the door burst open. 2 burly hospital security guards stepped in, followed by a stern-looking nurse. Mr. Bennett, the lead guard said, placing a heavy hand on Frank's chest. We've had complaints about the noise, and we've been informed by the patient's legal guardian that you are trespassing. Get your hands off me, Frank shouted, trying to shove the guard, but he was weak, deflated by the magnitude of his loss. Sir, you need to leave. Now. The guard ordered, gripping Frank's arm. Marilyn was already backing away, grabbing Tiffany's arm. Come on, Frank, don't make a scene. We'll call a lawyer. We'll sue them. But as they were dragged toward the door, dragging their Louis Vuitton luggage and their shattered egos with them, I saw the truth in their eyes. They knew they couldn't sue. They had no money for a lawyer. The money was here in this room with the daughter they had left to die. Frank looked back at me one last time from the hallway. His face was a mask of pure hatred. You're dead to me, he spat. I looked him dead in the eye, feeling the weight of 24 years of servitude lifting off my chest. I know, I whispered. I died the night you didn't answer the phone. The door swung shut, sealing them out. The silence returned to the room, but this time it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my studio apartment, casting a warm golden glow on the hardwood floor. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't the sprawling Victorian estate on Trad Street, with its rotting pillars and secrets hidden in the walls. It was just a 600-square-foot room in downtown Charleston, overlooking a quiet cobblestone alley. I walked to my kitchenette, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. I poured a cup, savoring the silence. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't heavy. It didn't carry the anticipation of a screaming match or the dread of a demanding phone call. It was just quiet. I sat at my small desk, opening my laptop to start the day. I wasn't a billionaire. The trust fund didn't buy me a private island or a fleet of sports cars. Deborah and I had agreed to invest the majority of it for the long term. Instead, I used a small portion to clear my student loans, pay for my physical therapy, and put a down payment on this modest space. I worked as a freelance interior designer on my own terms. If a client was toxic, I fired them. If I was tired, I rested. I paid my own electric bill. I bought my own groceries. And every night I slept for 8 hours without waking up in a cold sweat. Later that afternoon, I met Megan for lunch at a diner on the edge of town, a place far removed from the high society circles my parents used to desperate pretend they belonged to. "So," Megan said, taking a bite of her burger, "did you hear the news?" "What news?" "About the power couple." Megan smirked, using the nickname my parents used to caption their photos with. "The divorce is finalized today." I took a sip of my iced tea. "Who got the debt?" "Both of them," Megan replied. "Apparently, without your income to leverage for new loans, the house of cards collapsed in about 3 months. Frank is living in a basement efficiency near the airport. Marilyn is staying on a friend's couch trying to convince people she's just between estates." I looked out the window. I felt nothing. No joy, no pity. Just the dull acknowledgement of a mathematical equation finally balancing out. They had spent decades borrowing against a future that didn't belong to them, and the bill had finally come due. "And Tiffany?" I asked. Megan nodded toward the service counter. "Don't look now, but check the section near the kitchen." I shifted slightly in my booth. There, wearing a stained apricot-colored uniform, was my sister. Tiffany looked different. The eyelash extensions were gone. Her hair was pulled back in a messy, practical ponytail, and the arrogant shine in her eyes had been replaced by the dull exhaustion of a double shift. She was wiping down a table, scrubbing at a stubborn ketchup stain. A customer at the booth barked an order at her, snapping his fingers. Tiffany didn't roll her eyes. She didn't stomp her foot. She just nodded, mumbled a "Yes, sir," and hurried to the kitchen. "She's working," I whispered, genuinely surprised. "She has to," Megan shrugged. Deborah made sure the eviction was by the book. Tiffany had 2 choices: find a job or sleep in a shelter. Turns out, reality is a pretty good teacher. I watched my sister for a moment longer. Part of me wanted to walk over to say hello, maybe even offer a generic word of encouragement. But then I remembered the live stream. I remembered the lobster. I remembered how easy it was for her to eat while I bled. I turned back to Megan. "Let's pay the check." "You don't want to say hi?" "No," I said, putting my card on the table. "She's on her journey. I'm on mine. Our roads don't cross anymore." Walking home that evening, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A number I didn't recognize. I answered it out of habit. "Hello?" "Crystal." The voice was unmistakable. It was Marilyn, but gone was the imperious tone of the woman who ordered me to drive into a storm. Her voice was thin, reedy, trembling with a manufactured fragility. "Mom," I said flatly. "Oh, thank God you answered." She rushed out, sounding breathless. "Crystal, sweetheart, it's been so hard. Your father, he ruined everything. I'm all alone." I was thinking, maybe we could get coffee. Just talk. I miss my daughter. I stopped walking. I looked up at the sky, clear and blue, devoid of any storm clouds. 2 years ago, that sentence would have brought me to my knees. 2 years ago, I would have drained my bank account just to fix her problem. "You don't miss your daughter, Marilyn," I said calmly. "You miss your retirement plan." "How can you be so cruel?" She sobbed, the sound practiced and sharp. "I gave you life, and I gave you 24 years of it back," I replied. "We're even." "Crystal, please. I have nowhere to go." "Then I suggest you call Frank," I said. "I hear he has a basement." I hung up. Then I blocked the number. I stood there for a moment, waiting for the guilt to hit me. I waited for the familiar crushing weight of obligation. But it never came. Instead, I felt a light breeze coming off the harbor, smelling of salt and freedom. I realized then that the brain tumor or the car crash or whatever tragedy befalls us, sometimes it isn't the end. Sometimes it's the universe forcing us to stop running on a broken treadmill. My revenge wasn't leaving them homeless. My revenge wasn't seeing Tiffany wipe tables. My revenge was the fact that when I unlocked the door to my apartment, walked inside, and sat down on my cheap IKEA sofa, I was happy. I had learned the hardest lesson of all: you cannot earn love from people who only know how to count currency. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep people warm, who wouldn't even bring you a blanket when you're freezing. True peace isn't about having a perfect family. It's about realizing that you have the right to curate your own. It's about understanding that no is a complete sentence. I looked at a photo frame on my shelf. It was a picture of me, Megan, and Aunt Deborah at Thanksgiving laughing over a burnt turkey. That was my family. The people who showed up. The people who stayed. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I was Crystal Bennett. I was scarred. I was imperfect. But for the first time in my life, I was free.